The auction room fell deadly silent. 70-year-old auctioneer Walter Briggs, who had presided over hundreds of charity events in his lifetime, found himself frozen mid-sentence, gavel suspended in mid-air. Every head in the crowded hall swiveled toward the German shepherd standing rigidly on the stage, his ears perked at full attention. "Stop this auction right now." The voice boomed through the loudspeaker system with unmistakable authority, causing several bidders to drop their paddles in shock. The German shepherd's amber eyes widened, his powerful body trembling as if recognizing something that no one else could comprehend. In an instant, the elegant charity event dissolved into pandemonium. Wealthy patrons rose from their seats, security personnel rushed toward the sound booth, and cameras flashed in blinding succession. Through it all, the dog deemed unworthy just weeks ago stood transfixed, his gaze locked on the ceiling speakers, but tears seemingly gathering in his intelligent eyes as the voice continued, "That dog saved my son's life." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Maxwell, or Max, as they called him at the training facility, came into this world with every advantage a German shepherd could hope for: strong bloodlines tracing back to champion police dogs, perfect physical conformation, and eyes that seemed to understand human speech before he was even 8 weeks old. Born at the prestigious Blue Line K9 breeding program in Virginia, Max was destined for greatness, or so everyone thought. At 16 months, his impressive drive and intelligence had him outperforming most of his littermates in preliminary training. But underneath his perfect exterior lay an unpredictable quirk. When startled by certain low-frequency sounds, Max would freeze instead of continuing his assigned task. After 3 failed remediation attempts, the military dog program stamped his file with the word "No handler ever wants to see, unsuitable." For a dog bred specifically for service, rejection wasn't just disappointment, it was an existential crisis. Max's golden future evaporated overnight, replaced by the shadow of a municipal shelter and the ticking clock that came with it. James Wilson tugged his worn fleece jacket tighter against the October chill as he made his way up the steps of his modest ranch-style home in Woodbridge. At 68, the retired police officer's hands now betrayed a slight tremor, a combination of age and the memories that never quite left him. 30 years in the K9 division had given him purpose, respect, and his beloved partner Rex, a German shepherd who'd saved his life twice before cancer took him 5 years ago. Since Martha's passing last year after 43 years of marriage, James's days had stretched into a lonely routine. His pension barely covering his heart medication and the property taxes on the home they'd bought together in '79. The framed commendations on his wall told a story of bravery and service, but they couldn't keep him warm at night or give him a reason to stock the refrigerator with more than TV dinners and the occasional apple. Sarah Thompson tapped her stylish boots impatiently outside the director's office at Canine Second Chance's sanctuary, checking her watch for the 3rd time. At 35, she'd built a reputation as one of the East Coast's most innovative dog trainers, and specifically renowned for her ability to rehabilitate service dogs who'd failed certification. Her sanctuary, funded primarily through her connections to celebrity dog advocate Robert Bobby Miller, had saved dozens of animals from euthanasia, but their success had created a new problem: they were running out of space. Today's meeting would determine whether her controversial idea, an exclusive auction featuring rejected service dogs for civilians, would get the board's approval. Sarah believed passionately that these broken dogs often possessed exceptional abilities that traditional programs failed to recognize. She just needed to convince everyone else. The morning of Max's final evaluation dawned crisp and clear at the Blue Line K9 Training Center. A light frost covered the expansive training grounds, melting slowly as the November sun crept over the Virginia hills. Max had been preparing for this day for 14 months, and by all accounts he was a standout candidate. His handling of the obstacle course was impeccable, his scent detection nearly flawless, and his obedience training scores consistently ranked in the top percentile. Lead trainer Captain Michael Harrison stood clipboard in hand, his weathered face betraying nothing as he watched Max and his temporary handler approach the final station: threat assessment and response. "This is where we separate the exceptional from the merely adequate," Harrison explained to the small group of military observers. The K9 must identify and appropriately respond to a concealed threat without hesitation. Max moved confidently through the simulation, a mock urban street scene with various distractions strategically placed. His handler gave the search command and Max began methodically clearing the area, his powerful nose working the air currents. He alerted correctly on 2 decoys before approaching the final scenario, a hidden training officer in protective gear. As Max rounded the corner, everything was proceeding perfectly. Then disaster struck. From somewhere outside the training area, a distant truck backfired with a distinctive low rumble. Max's ears twitched, and for 3 critical seconds he froze, his focus broken. When the training officer made his scripted aggressive move, Max recovered and responded. But those 3 seconds of hesitation were unforgivable for a dog destined for combat zones or high-risk law enforcement. Harrison made a single notation on his clipboard and signaled for the exercise to end. 2 hours later, the verdict was delivered. Candidate 24/7 billion exhibits unpredictable stress response under simulated threat conditions. The recommendation, immediate removal from program. The words hit Max's handler like a physical blow, though Max himself only understood that the energy around him had changed, become heavy with disappointment. "He's otherwise perfect," the handler protested. "Couldn't we?" "Perfect isn't good enough when lives are on the line," Harrison interrupted. "We can't deploy a K9 with any hesitation response, no matter how brief. Program standards are absolute. He'll be transferred to Woodbridge Municipal tomorrow. Maybe someone will want him as a pet." That night, Max slept on a different bed in a different kennel, separated from the other trainees. He didn't understand the concept of failure, only that something had changed, and not for the better. By noon the next day, his military-grade tactical collar had been replaced with a simple nylon one, and he found himself in a transport crate headed for a facility that smelled of fear, disinfectant, and despair. James Wilson hadn't planned to visit the shelter that Tuesday afternoon. His original destination had been the pharmacy for his monthly heart medication refill, but as he passed the Woodbridge Municipal Animal Shelter, an inexplicable impulse made him turn into the parking lot. Perhaps it was the adoption special sign, or maybe it was just the emptiness waiting for him at home. Either way, he found himself shuffling through the entrance, the antiseptic smell bringing back memories of hospital visits he'd rather forget. "Can I help you, sir?" A young woman with kind eyes and a volunteer badge looked up from the reception desk. "Just looking, I suppose," James offered with a slight shrug. "Been a while since I've had a dog." The volunteer, whose badge identified her as Amy, brightened. "You've come on a good day. We just got some new arrivals, including a gorgeous German Shepherd. Were you thinking of a particular breed?" James felt a twinge in his chest that had nothing to do with his heart condition. German Shepherds had been his life for decades. "I used to work K9 division," he said quietly. "Had 4 partners over the years, all shepherds." Amy's eyes widened with respect. "Then you definitely need to meet Max. He just came in from one of those training programs. Failed out at the last minute, apparently, though he seems pretty amazing to me." She led James down a corridor of kennels, past barking dogs of all sizes and descriptions. At the very end, in a larger run, sat a magnificent black and tan shepherd, alert but silent, watching their approach with intelligent eyes. Something about the dog's dignified bearing, despite his circumstances, struck James deeply. This wasn't a dog who belonged behind bars. "Beautiful, isn't he?" Amy said, unlocking the kennel door. "They said he hesitated during threat response training, whatever that means. Seems like a small reason to reject him." James entered slowly, using the proper approach techniques ingrained from decades of handling working dogs. Max assessed him calmly, nostrils flaring slightly as he took in James's scent. Then, to Amy's surprise, the dog, who had remained aloof with other visitors, stood and moved directly to James, pressing his head gently against the man's thigh in a gesture of connection. "Well, I'll be damned," James whispered, carefully placing his weathered hand on Max's head. "You know your own kind, don't you, boy?" For 30 minutes, James sat on the concrete floor, ignoring his protesting knees as he went through informal assessments of Max's training. The dog responded flawlessly to basic commands, showed appropriate focus, and displayed none of the warning signs James had learned to recognize in unstable animals. Whatever had caused his failure, it wasn't obvious in this setting. "I'd like to adopt him," James finally said, rising stiffly to his feet. But the moment of connection was shattered when the adoption counselor reviewed his application and gently explained the adoption fee, plus the recommended supplies for a large dog. "It's $350 for shepherd breeds, plus we recommend you budget about $200 for initial supplies," she explained. "And given his training background, we'd strongly recommend professional follow-up training, which runs about $75 per session." James's face fell. His pension check had already gone to property taxes this month, and his medication copay had increased again. And the numbers simply didn't add up. "I understand," he said, his voice tight. "Could you maybe hold him for a few days while I figure something out?" The counselor's expression told him everything. "We have a 3-day hold policy, but I should warn you, dogs with his qualifications usually don't last long. Someone will want him as a status symbol, if nothing else." James knelt once more beside Max, who seemed to sense the shift in mood. "I'll be back for you if I can, partner," he promised quietly. "You deserve better than this place." As he left, he felt Max's eyes following him, and for the first time in months, James found himself offering up a prayer to a God he wasn't sure had been listening since Martha died. Sarah Thompson strode purposefully through the shelter doors the following morning, clipboard in hand and determination in her step. Her meeting with the board had gone better than expected. They'd approved her auction concept, provided she could find suitable candidates within budget. Woodbridge Municipal wasn't her first stop of the day, but something about Amy's enthusiastic phone call about a spectacular washout from Blue Line had piqued her interest enough to rearrange her schedule. "He's exactly what we're looking for," Amy insisted, leading Sarah to Max's kennel. "Failed for some minor stress response, but otherwise perfectly trained. And you should have seen him yesterday with this older gentleman. It was like they'd known each other for years." Sarah observed Max carefully. Unlike most shelter dogs who either barked for attention or cowered in the back, Max sat attentively at the front of his kennel, assessing her with clear intelligence. His coat was still glossy from the excellent care at Blue Line, his muscular build evident of premium nutrition and proper exercise. Such a waste of potential. "Let me see his paperwork," Sarah requested, and her eyebrows rose as she reviewed his training history. 98th percentile in scent detection, advanced obedience compliance, perfect health screening, only to fail in the final phase. That's unusual. She entered the kennel and ran through her own evaluation series, testing Max's responses to various commands and stimuli. When she deliberately dropped her keys with a loud clang, she noticed his momentary freeze, barely perceptible, but there. Not fear, exactly, but a processing delay. Intriguing. "I'll take him for the program," she decided, already mentally pairing him with a potential bidder from her exclusive client list. "He's exactly the kind of diamond in the rough we're looking for." As Sarah completed the transfer paperwork, she happened to glance at the visitor log from the previous day. The name James Wilson caught her eye, along with a note, "Former K-9 officer, very good with Max, financial approval pending." "Tell me about this visitor," she asked Amy. "Oh, it was heartbreaking," Amy replied. "Older gentleman, former police K-9 handler. He and Max had this immediate connection. He wanted to adopt but couldn't afford the fees. Said he'd try to come back, but—" She shrugged, the gesture conveying the reality they both understood. Good intentions rarely overcame financial limitations. Sarah hesitated, an unusual feeling of conflict washing over her. Her program was designed for wealthy donors who could provide exceptional homes, not retired officers on fixed incomes. And yet, did he leave a contact number? 4 hours later, Max was settled into the impressive kennel facilities at K-9 Second Chances, uncertain of his constantly changing circumstances, but responding well to the structured environment. Sarah had made 3 phone calls, one to her event coordinator confirming Max's inclusion in the upcoming auction, one to her celebrity contact Bobby Miller about headlining the event, and one that she was still uncertain about to James Wilson, offering him a volunteer position at the sanctuary. The auction was still proceeding as planned, but something about the old officer's connection with Max had resonated with her, and Sarah Thompson had learned long ago to trust her instincts when it came to dogs and their people. "You've had quite a journey already," she told Max as she checked him into his temporary home. "Let's see where it takes you next." The Grand Potomac Hotel ballroom had been transformed for the evening's Second Chance Companions charity auction. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over round tables draped in midnight blue linens and adorned with centerpieces of white roses and silver candle holders. The stage at the front featured an elegant podium and a specially designed presentation area where each dog would be showcased. By 6 o'clock, the room buzzed with the quiet affluence of Washington's elite senators mingling with tech entrepreneurs, defense contractors chatting amiably with media moguls. At $5,000 per plate, the dinner preceding the auction had already generated substantial funding for canine second chances, but Sarah Thompson knew the real money would come from the competitive bidding for the 8 exceptional dogs carefully selected for the program. Behind the scenes, a temporary kennel area had been established in one of the hotel's conference rooms, where each dog was being prepared by a handler. Max sat patiently as a young woman named Jessica brushed his coat to a glossy shine and adjusted the custom blue collar with the sanctuary's emblem. Unlike the other dogs who displayed varying degrees of excitement or anxiety, Max remained composed, his amber eyes taking in the bustling activity with quiet intelligence. He had adapted quickly to the sanctuary routine over the past 2 weeks, responding well to the enrichment activities and specialized training sessions designed to showcase his abilities. But Sarah had noticed something curious despite his progress. Max seemed to be waiting for something or someone, his attention often drifting to the entrance whenever the door opened. "He's our most impressive candidate physically," Sarah explained to her assistant director, Ryan, as they reviewed the evening's program. "Blue Line's loss is definitely our gain. I've listed his starting bid at $15,000, but I expect he'll go for much more." "Any particular prospects in mind?" Ryan asked, checking off items on his tablet. Sarah nodded toward a distinguished-looking couple near the bar. "The Harringtons. Their security firm provides executive protection worldwide. They've been looking for a dog with military-grade training but without the procurement restrictions. Max would be perfect." She glanced at her watch and frowned slightly. "Has our volunteer handler arrived yet? The one I assigned to Max?" Ryan shook his head. "No sign of him. Should we assign someone else?" Sarah hesitated, an unusual feeling of disappointment washing over her. "Give him another 10 minutes. He called earlier to confirm he was coming." She didn't add that she'd specifically arranged for James Wilson to handle Max during the auction, hoping the dog's obvious connection with the former officer would enhance his presentation. It was an unorthodox decision allowing a non-staff member this role. But Sarah's instincts rarely led her astray when it came to what was best for her dogs. In fact, at that very moment, James Wilson was making his way through the hotel lobby, feeling decidedly out of place. He had polished his only good shoes, pressed his navy suit that hadn't left the closet since Martha's funeral, and even splurged on a professional haircut. But nothing could disguise the fact that he didn't belong in this world of casual wealth and influence. The volunteer position Sarah had offered him 3 days a week working with the shelter's special cases had been a godsend, giving him purpose again and allowing him to spend time with Max. When she'd asked him to present Max at the auction, he'd agreed immediately, seeing it as a chance to ensure the dog found a worthy home, even if it couldn't be with him. "Name, sir?" asked the tuxedoed attendant at the ballroom entrance. "James Wilson. I'm a volunteer handler for one of the dogs," he replied, suddenly aware of a twinge in his chest that he hoped was just anxiety and not his arrhythmia acting up again. The attendant scanned his list and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Wilson, please proceed to the staging area through that door to the right." James made his way through the crowded ballroom, nodding politely at curious glances but avoiding eye contact. The disparity between his modest circumstances and the obvious wealth surrounding him was uncomfortable, but he reminded himself why he was here, for Max. Nothing else mattered. By 7:30, the auction was underway, with Walter Briggs, a veteran charity auctioneer known for his ability to coax extraordinary sums from willing donors, presiding with practiced charm. The first three dogs, a gentle Labrador with specialized therapy training, a Doberman with executive protection capabilities, and a Border Collie with remarkable detection skills, had all sold for impressive amounts. The audience was engaged, the bidding spirited, and Sarah allowed herself to relax slightly as she monitored the proceedings from the side of the stage. Everything was going according to plan. Next we have lot number 4, a truly exceptional candidate, Walter announced as the lights dimmed slightly for a video presentation. Maxwell is a 2-year-old German Shepherd from the prestigious Blue Line breeding program with advanced training in multiple disciplines. The screen behind Walter displayed professional footage of Max performing various tasks, navigating obstacles, demonstrating scent detection, and executing complex commands. The audience murmured appreciatively as his impressive physical abilities were showcased. Maxwell was redirected to our program due to a specialized temperament that makes him ideal for certain civilian applications, Walter continued, using the carefully worded description Sarah had provided that avoided mentioning his failure directly. He excels in controlled environments and shows exceptional bonding capabilities with the right handler. Backstage, James stood with Max at his side, both of them listening to the presentation. James could feel the slight tremor in Max's body, a tension that hadn't been present during their practice sessions. "It's okay, boy," he whispered, gently stroking Max's head. "You're going to find a good home tonight. Better than what I could give you." The words caught in his throat, the impending separation already weighing on him like a physical burden. "And now, let me introduce you to Maxwell himself, accompanied by his handler, Mr. Wilson," Walter announced. James took a deep breath and led Max onto the stage, executing the practice routine flawlessly. Max responded to each command with perfect precision, demonstrating his sit-stay, his retrieve, and his poised alertness. As they completed their circuit of the stage, James brought Max to the front, where he sat attentively beside him, the picture of canine excellence. "We'll start the bidding at $15,000, Walter announced. "Do I hear 15? A brief hesitation fell over the room. James felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Why wasn't anyone bidding? Had he done something wrong in the presentation? Remember, ladies and gentlemen, this is an extraordinary animal with over $40,000 worth of professional training, Walter prompted, his experienced eye scanning the room for potential bidders. Finally, a hand raised. $15,000, called a man James recognized as one of the security professionals Sarah had pointed out during their briefing. "I have 15, thank you, sir. Do I hear 20? Another pause, longer this time. Walter's smile remained fixed, but James could see the slight concern in his eyes. 16,000. Came another bid, less enthusiastic than the first. 16,000, thank you. Do I hear 17? The bidding continued but lacked the energy of the previous lots. It stalled at $22,000, well below Sarah's projected minimum of $30,000. From his position on stage, James could see Sarah in intense conversation with Ryan, both looking concerned. Max remained perfectly positioned beside him, but James felt the dog's occasional glance upward, sensing his handler's discomfort. 22,000 going once, Walter announced, his voice maintaining its enthusiasm through professional skill alone. Going twice. James looked down at Max, their eyes meeting in a moment of silent communication. This magnificent animal, created for greatness, was being overlooked just as James himself had felt overlooked and discarded after his retirement. Something in him rebelled against it, a protective instinct that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with the connection they'd formed. Before Walter could complete the sale, a commotion at the back of the ballroom drew everyone's attention. The doors had opened and security personnel were converging on someone attempting to enter without proper credentials. James couldn't see clearly, but the disruption was enough to halt the proceedings momentarily. Walter, ever the professional, attempted to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen, please." That's when it happened. The hotel's public address system suddenly crackled to life, overriding the auction sound system with a distinctive electronic tone that caused Max to stiffen instantly, with his ears perking forward. James recognized the reaction. It was the same freeze response that had likely cost Max's certification, triggered by a specific frequency. "Stop this auction right now," a powerful male voice commanded through the speakers, causing a wave of confused murmurs to sweep through the audience. "That dog saved my son's life." The room erupted into chaos. Security personnel abandoned their position at the door and rushed toward the sound booth. Walter stood frozen at the podium, gavel in hand, as flashbulbs from press photographers lit up the room. Sarah pushed her way toward the stage, face pale with shock. And through it all, Max remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the ceiling speakers, as if recognizing the voice that had interrupted his fate. James instinctively placed a protective hand on Max's back, feeling the dog trembling beneath his touch. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though his own heart was racing. "I've got you." The voice continued, emotional but clear, as technicians struggled to regain control of the sound system. "My name is Robert Miller, Bobby Miller, and that German Shepherd was supposed to be my son's service dog. He recognized a seizure when no one else did, even after they rejected him from the program. I've spent 2 weeks trying to find him, and I'm not letting him go to the highest bidder." James looked at Max with new understanding, pieces falling into place. The hesitation that had disqualified him wasn't fear or inability, it was a different kind of recognition, a pause to process something others had missed. And somehow this voice from the speakers belonged to someone who understood that. In the span of 30 seconds, the carefully orchestrated charity auction had dissolved into confusion, and Max's future, and perhaps James's as well, had taken an unexpected turn that neither Sarah's meticulous planning nor James's humble hopes could have anticipated. The Grand Potomac Hotel remained in chaos for nearly 30 minutes following Bobby Miller's dramatic announcement. Security personnel had located the celebrity dog advocate in the sound booth, where he had convinced a young technician to give him access to the PA system. Hotel management, auction organizers, and Miller's own security team converged in a tense standoff that only resolved when Sarah Thompson intervened in suggesting they move the discussion to a private conference room. As the bewildered auction attendees were directed to the adjoining ballroom for an extended cocktail hour, James found himself shepherded along with Max into a wood-paneled meeting room where the future of the German Shepherd would apparently be decided. "This is completely unprecedented," Ryan hissed to Sarah as they entered. "The legal implications alone." "Not now," Sarah cut him off with a sharp glance before turning her attention to Bobby Miller, who stood at the far end of the conference table, his usual charismatic camera-ready demeanor replaced by genuine agitation. Bobby Miller's reputation preceded him, former child actor turned successful producer and outspoken animal rights advocate. His foundation had donated generously to causes ranging from wildlife conservation to domestic animal welfare, but he was particularly passionate about service dogs, often sharing stories about how a therapy dog had helped him through his own struggles with anxiety and depression in his teen years. "Mr. Miller," Sarah began carefully, "while I appreciate your enthusiasm, there are protocols." "Protocols?" Miller interrupted, his voice tight with emotion. "Like the protocols that rejected this exceptional animal because he didn't fit some arbitrary standard? My son was visiting Blue Line with me 6 weeks ago during a facility tour. Maxwell here." He gestured toward the dog, who sat attentively beside James, was the only dog who reacted when Ethan had a petit mouse seizure. A seizure so subtle even I missed it. This dog froze, focused on my son, and then nudged a trainer. They called it hesitation in training. I call it recognizing something no one else did." James looked down at Max with new understanding, his hand automatically moving to stroke the dog's head. The freeze response that had cost Max his certification hadn't been fear or indecision, it had been recognition of something beyond the parameters of his training. "We've been trying to locate him since we learned he'd been removed from the program," Bobby continued. "By the time we tracked him to Woodbridge, he'd already been transferred to your sanctuary. I've been leaving messages with your foundation for 2 weeks." Sarah's expression faltered. With the auction preparations consuming her attention, she'd delegated many communications to assistants. "I wasn't made aware of your interest, Mr. Miller. Had I known." "It doesn't matter now," Bobby said firmly. "I'm prepared to make a donation to your organization equal to whatever you projected this auction would generate. But Maxwell belongs with my family. My son has been asking about him every day since that visit." The room fell silent as everyone processed this extraordinary offer. Ryan was already calculating figures on his tablet, his eyes widening at the potential windfall. The hotel manager and security chief exchanged glances, sensing that the evening's disruption might yet have a positive resolution. But James remained silent, his weathered hand still resting on Max's coat, his heart conflicted. He wanted what was best for the dog, but the thought of saying goodbye so suddenly created a physical ache in his chest. "There's a complication," Sarah said carefully, glancing at James. "Maxwell has formed a significant bond with Mr. Wilson here, one of our volunteers. He's a former K-9 officer who's been working with Max since he arrived at our facility." Bobby's intense gaze shifted to James, noticing him properly for the first time. "You're the handler? The one who presented him tonight?" James nodded, straightening slightly under the scrutiny. "Yes, sir. I've been working with Max for the past 2 weeks. "And before that?" Bobby asked sharply. "Did you know him at Blue Line?" "No, sir. I met him at Woodbridge Municipal Shelter the day after he was transferred there." James hesitated, then decided that honesty was the only approach that made sense. "I wanted to adopt him myself, but couldn't afford the fees on my retirement income. MS. Thompson was kind enough to offer me a volunteer position so I could continue spending time with him." Something in James's simple explanation seemed to resonate with Bobby, whose expression softened slightly. "You recognized something in him too, didn't you? Something the experts missed." "I've handled K-9s for over 30 years, Mr. Miller. Max is special, one of those once-in-a-career dogs. Whatever caused that hesitation they reported, it wasn't fear or poor training. He's solid as a rock." The two men regarded each other with newfound respect, united in their appreciation of the animal sitting calmly between them, seemingly aware that his fate was being decided. By morning, the charity auction chaos had made headlines in both traditional media and social platforms. Amateur videos of Bobby Miller's announcement had gone viral, accumulating millions of views overnight. Outside the sanctuary gates, a small contingent of reporters had gathered, hoping for statements from either Sarah Thompson or representatives of the Miller Foundation. The story had struck a chord with the public, a rejected service dog, a celebrity intervention, and hints of a special ability that conventional training had failed to recognize. Inside her office, Sarah fielded calls from major donors, board members, and media outlets, trying to navigate the unexpected publicity while finalizing the agreement with Bobby Miller's lawyers. The terms were generous, a donation twice the size of what the entire auction had been projected to generate, plus ongoing support for a new program specifically focused on identifying and training dogs with unique capabilities that didn't fit standard protocols. The sanctuary's future was secure, but Sarah found herself distracted, her thoughts repeatedly returning to the quiet interaction she'd witnessed between James and Max as they'd parted the previous night. "I don't know if this is the right decision," she admitted to Ryan as they reviewed the final paperwork. "James and Max, that's a partnership that comes along rarely. The kind we're usually trying to create, not separate." "It's not our decision," Ryan reminded her pragmatically. "Miller's offer is beyond generous, and think about what this means for our mission. We'll be able to help dozens more dogs with this funding." Sarah nodded absently, signing the last document with a slight frown. Has James arrived for his shift yet? That's the other thing, Ryan said hesitantly. He called to resign his volunteer position. Said now that Max is leaving, there's no point in continuing. Sarah put down her pen, a decision crystallizing in her mind. Get Bobby Miller on the phone. There's one more condition I want to add to our agreement. At his modest home in Woodbridge, James moved slowly through his morning routine, the house seeming emptier than usual. His brief time with Max had illuminated how lonely his life had become since Martha's passing. Now, with the dog headed to a new life with the Miller family, the void yawned wider than before. He had no regrets about stepping back from the sanctuary. Watching other dogs find homes would be a constant reminder of what might have been. As he sipped his coffee, he heard a vehicle pull into his driveway, a sleek black SUV with tinted windows that screamed executive transportation. James set down his mug and moved to the window, confused. He wasn't expecting visitors, especially not the kind that arrived in vehicles worth more than his house. The rear door opened, and to James's astonishment, Bobby Miller himself emerged, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, but unmistakable nonetheless. Behind him, a sanctuary staff member led a familiar German shepherd on a leash. Max immediately perked up, recognizing the house and, more importantly, its occupant. James's hands trembled slightly as he opened the front door, his mind racing with possibilities, none of which seemed plausible. Mr. Wilson, Bobby greeted him with an extended hand. I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I wanted to speak with you personally before we finalize everything. Of course, Mr. Miller. Please come in. James gestured toward his living room, suddenly acutely aware of the modest furnishings and dated decor. Can I offer you coffee? Actually, I was hoping we could talk while walking Maxwell, Bobby suggested. He seems eager to explore your neighborhood. Indeed, Max was already oriented toward the sidewalk, his posture indicating readiness for a familiar routine. James nodded, grabbing his jacket and the spare leash he kept by the door, a hopeful gesture that now seemed prophetic. As they walked side by side down the quiet suburban street, Max moving easily between them, Bobby came directly to the point. Sarah Thompson told me about your background. 30 years in K-9. 4 partners. Citations for bravery. That's an impressive career. Just doing my job, James replied modestly, unsure where this was heading. She also mentioned your attempt to adopt Maxwell when you first met him. Bobby stopped walking, turning to face James directly. I've been thinking about this situation all night, Mr. Wilson. My son needs a service dog, that much is certain. The seizures are becoming more frequent as he enters adolescence. But a service dog requires proper handling, consistent training, reinforcement of skills. My schedule is complicated. Film productions, foundation work, travel. James remained silent, sensing there was more to this explanation. I've had an idea, Bobby continued. A proposal, really. The foundation is establishing a specialized training initiative for dogs like Maxwell ones with unique abilities that don't fit standard protocols. We need experienced handlers to develop new training methodologies, to recognize and nurture these special talents. Sounds like an excellent program, James offered cautiously. We need someone to oversee it, Bobby said directly. Someone with decades of experience, someone who already has a connection with our first candidate. He gestured toward Max, who sat watching them both with intelligent eyes. The position includes housing on my estate in Virginia, full medical benefits, and a salary commensurate with your expertise. Most importantly, it includes partnership with Maxwell here, who would live with you while training with my son 3 days a week. James stared at the younger man, certain he had misunderstood. You're offering me a job? And Max? Bobby smiled, the charming expression that had made him famous in his youth. I'm offering you both a purpose, Mr. Wilson. My son needs Maxwell's special abilities. Maxwell needs proper handling and development. And with all due respect, you seem to need them both. The implications washed over James in waves: financial security, meaningful work, and most incredibly, a continued partnership with Max. It seemed too perfect, too convenient a solution. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" he asked finally. Bobby's expression grew more serious. "Because 30 years ago, a K-9 officer found a scared, lost kid who'd wandered away from a film set in Baltimore. The officer and his German shepherd stayed with that kid for hours, kept him safe, and talked to him about how special his dog was, how they communicated in ways other people couldn't understand. That officer helped that kid find his voice again after months of being too anxious to speak." He extended his hand toward James. "I don't expect you to remember every lost kid you helped, Officer Wilson. But I never forgot you or your partner, Rex. When I saw you on that stage with Maxwell last night, I knew exactly who you were." The revelation struck James with physical force, memories rushing back of a skinny, silent child found huddled in a maintenance shed, a minor incident in his long career, but apparently a pivotal moment for the boy who would become Bobby Miller. The synchronicity of their reconnection decades later, brought together by another German shepherd with special abilities, seemed almost too perfect to be coincidence. Sarah's proposal to incorporate Bobby Miller's new training initiative into the sanctuary's programs proved to be the perfect solution to the ethical dilemma that had been troubling her. The morning after the chaotic auction, she convened an emergency board meeting to present the expanded vision. K-9's second chances would now include a specialized research and training division specifically focused on dogs whose unique abilities fell outside standard assessment parameters. With Bobby Miller's considerable financial backing and public support, the sanctuary would become a pioneer in recognizing and developing canine talents previously overlooked by traditional programs. The announcement generated immediate controversy within the service dog community. Training directors from established programs expressed skepticism about modified standards, arguing that consistency and reliability were non-negotiable for working dogs. Military and police K-9 representatives worried about the implications for their selection processes. But others, particularly in the therapy and medical alert dog fields, expressed cautious optimism about expanding the understanding of canine capabilities. "What we're proposing isn't lowering standards," Sarah explained to a journalist from National Canine Review. "It's recognizing that our current standards might be missing important capabilities that don't fit our existing assessment models." Maxwell's case is the perfect example. His hesitation wasn't a training failure. It was recognition of a medical event so subtle that human observers missed it entirely. The controversy only increased public interest in the program, bringing additional donors and volunteers to the sanctuary. Applications to have dogs evaluated for the special initiative poured in, many from families with children who had rare medical conditions that standard service dogs weren't typically trained to detect. Sarah found herself working 14-hour days, simultaneously managing the sanctuary's existing programs while helping establish the new division that would eventually be directed by James Wilson once his transition to Bobby Miller's estate was complete. Through it all, James continued his volunteer work with a renewed sense of purpose, often accompanied by Max, who remained technically under the sanctuary's care until all arrangements were finalized. The German shepherd thrived under the consistent interaction with his chosen handler, displaying increasingly sophisticated responses to subtle stimuli that suggested his hesitation response was indeed a form of processing complex sensory input. Weekly visits from Bobby Miller and his son Ethan allowed Max to develop familiarity with the boy whose seizures he had detected, building the foundation for their future working relationship. "He's responding differently to Ethan than to other visitors," James observed during one such session, watching as Max positioned himself protectively near the teenager. "He's tracking something in his movements, maybe subtle changes in gait or expression." "That's exactly what we need to document and understand," Sarah replied, the researcher in her fascinated by the implications. "If we can identify what Max is detecting, we might be able to train other dogs to recognize similar patterns." The transformation in James was equally remarkable. The purpose that had been missing since his retirement had returned, along with a vitality that made him appear years younger. His expertise, long relegated to retirement anecdotes, was now being actively sought by professionals developing the new training protocols. Even his health seemed to improve, his movement more fluid, his habitual heart medication sometimes forgotten as his days filled with meaningful activity. I was ready to just fade away, he admitted to Sarah one evening as they watched Max and Ethan working together in the sanctuary's training yard. Figured I'd done my part, served my time. Didn't expect to get a second chapter. Sarah smiled, thinking of the many second chances that had converged in this unlikely partnership: a rejected dog, a retired officer, a sanctuary at a crossroads, and a family seeking help for their son. Sometimes the best contributions come after we think our story is over, she replied, watching as Max alerted to something in Ethan's behavior that neither of them could perceive, demonstrating once again the extraordinary connections possible between humans and dogs when both were given the opportunity to reveal their true capabilities. The demonstration day for the Specialized Canine Recognition Program dawned clear and cool, a perfect spring morning at the sprawling Virginia state where Bobby Miller had established the initiative's headquarters. What had begun as a controversial concept 6 months earlier had evolved into a structured program with rigorous protocols and ambitious goals. Today marked its public debut with representatives from military and police K-9 divisions, medical research institutions, and service dog organizations gathering to witness the outcomes of the program's innovative approach to canine training. A grand pavilion had been erected on the estate's main lawn, with tiered seating for over 100 invited guests. Adjacent to it stood a series of demonstration areas designed to showcase different aspects of the specialized training: a mock apartment for seizure detection, an outdoor course for subtle behavioral recognition, and a scent identification station where dogs would demonstrate their ability to detect biochemical changes 2 minutes for standard equipment to register. At the center of it all was a main presentation platform where James Wilson would introduce the program's philosophy and methodologies before the practical demonstrations began. Behind the scenes, in the converted carriage house that now served as the program's operational headquarters, James adjusted his tie nervously. 6 months had transformed his life beyond recognition. The modest cottage on the estate grounds had become a comfortable home. His health had improved under the care of specialists provided by the Miller Foundation, and his days were filled with purposeful work developing training methods for dogs like Max. But public speaking had never been his forte, and today's audience included some of the most respected figures in the canine training community, many of whom remained skeptical about the program's premise. "You look like you're heading to court, not giving a presentation," Sarah Thompson observed with a smile as she entered the office. As the sanctuary's representative on the program's advisory board, she had been instrumental in navigating the complex relationships between the various organizations involved. "Feels about the same," James admitted, tugging at his collar. "When I was on the force, I let my dogs do the impressive work. I just held the leash." "That's exactly what you're doing today," Sarah reminded him. "This program isn't about you, it's about Max and the others showing what they can do." She glanced at the German Shepherd resting calmly in the corner, seemingly unperturbed by the day's significance. "How's he doing with Ethan's routine?" "Perfect," James replied, his expression softening as he looked at his canine partner. "Better than perfect, actually. He's anticipating the seizures now, alerting up to 15 minutes before they happen. The neurologist can't explain it, but the EEG readings confirm it every time." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Bobby Miller, whose casual charisma belied the tension evident in his posture. "We've got company," he announced without preamble. "Captain Harrison from Blue Line just arrived with 2 of his senior trainers. They're saying they want to observe the proceedings." James stiffened. Michael Harrison had been the officer who'd officially disqualified Max from the military program, effectively consigning him to the shelter system. His presence today felt like both a challenge and an opportunity, a chance to demonstrate that different standards didn't mean lower ones. "Good," James said firmly, surprising both Sarah and Bobby. "Let's show them exactly what they missed." By 10 o'clock, the pavilion was filled to capacity with latecomers setting up folding chairs on the periphery. The audience represented a curious mix of uniforms and business attire, skeptical frowns and eager anticipation. In the front row, Ethan Miller sat between his parents, the teenager's usual nervous energy tempered by the knowledge that he would be participating in the day's most significant demonstration. 3 rows back, Captain Harrison and his colleagues maintained carefully neutral expressions, their presence creating a subtle current of tension. James took his position at the podium, Max seated attentively beside him, and surveyed the assembled experts. His prepared remarks suddenly seemed inadequate, too formal for what he needed to convey. Setting the notes aside, he decided to speak from his heart instead. For 30 years, I worked with German Shepherds in the K9 division, he began, his voice gaining strength as he settled into the familiar territory of his experience. I trained them to standard protocols, evaluated them on established criteria, and retired the ones who didn't meet the mark. I believed in the system because it worked most of the time. He gestured toward Max. This dog was rejected from one of the finest training programs in the country because he hesitated during threat assessment. By standard measures, that hesitation made him unreliable, potentially dangerous in high-risk situations. But what we've discovered is that his hesitation wasn't failure, it was recognition of something beyond the parameters of his training. Over the next 20 minutes, James outlined the program's core principles and preliminary findings, supported by video documentation and medical data collected during the 6-month pilot phase. He explained how Max's processing pause, rather than being a flaw, actually indicated his brain integrating subtle sensory information that traditional training hadn't taught him how to report. Similar patterns had been identified in 7 other dogs now participating in the program, each rejected from conventional training but demonstrating exceptional capabilities in specialized contexts. We're not suggesting that all training standards should be revised, James clarified, aware of the resistance from traditional programs. Military and police work requires absolute reliability under specific conditions. But we are proposing that dogs who don't meet those particular standards might excel in other vital roles we're just beginning to understand. As James concluded his presentation, he noticed Captain Harrison leaning forward slightly, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. It wasn't wholesale acceptance, but it was attention, the first step toward potential change. The practical demonstrations proceeded smoothly through the morning, with each dog handler team showcasing different aspects of the specialized training. A Labrador demonstrated the ability to detect blood sugar fluctuations before standard monitors registered changes. A Border Collie mix identified subtle movement patterns indicating the onset of a migraine. A Rottweiler discriminated between different types of anxiety behaviors, responding appropriately to each. The audience's skepticism gradually shifted toward engaged curiosity, with many taking detailed notes and asking increasingly specific questions. After a brief lunch break, the program resumed with the most anticipated demonstration, Max's work with Ethan. The teenager had been living with absent seizures since childhood, brief episodes where he appeared to space out but was actually experiencing electrical disruptions in his brain. Because the seizures were subtle and sometimes barely perceptible, even to his parents, Ethan had experienced several dangerous situations, including one where he'd nearly drowned after having a seizure while swimming. James led Max to the central demonstration area, where Ethan was already seated in a comfortable chair, monitoring equipment discreetly positioned nearby to record physiological data. The scenario was designed to simulate a normal afternoon of homework and entertainment, with Ethan moving between different activities while Max maintained awareness of his condition. What you'll observe, James explained to the audience, is that Max doesn't just alert when a seizure begins. He actually signals several minutes before any visible symptoms appear, giving Ethan time to move to a safe position and his parents time to prepare any necessary support. The demonstration began routinely enough, with Ethan working on a tablet while Max rested nearby, seemingly relaxed but maintaining subtle vigilance. After approximately 12 minutes, the German Shepherd's demeanor changed. He raised his head, ears forward, and fixed his attention on Ethan, who showed no outward signs of distress. Following his training, Max moved to Ethan's side and placed a paw on his knee, the alert signal they had established. Ethan immediately set aside his tablet and moved to a reclining position on a nearby couch, giving a thumbs up to the audience to indicate that the alert was happening as expected. James narrated the proceedings, explaining how the alert allowed Ethan to position himself safely before the seizure began. It was at this precise moment that the day's careful orchestration encountered its first disruption. From the back of the pavilion, a commotion erupted as security personnel moved quickly toward someone who had bypassed the check-in protocols. James looked up, momentarily distracted, to see a distraught woman being intercepted by Miller's security team. "Please," she called out, her voice carrying across the pavilion. "I need to see the German Shepherd. They said he can detect seizures before they happen." The audience turned in their seats, the demonstration temporarily forgotten as the unexpected drama unfolded. Bobby Miller rose from his seat, moving quickly to intercept the situation before it could derail the event entirely. We have a private demonstration in progress," one of the security officers was explaining firmly. "If you'd like to schedule a consultation." "There's no time," the woman insisted, her voice cracking with emotion. "My daughter, she's in the car. Her episodes don't show on regular tests, but they're getting worse. Please, I just need to know if he can see them like he sees the boys." Bobby reached the scene, his expression shifting from irritation to concern as he assessed the woman's genuine distress. After a brief, intense conversation that the audience couldn't overhear, he turned and made his way to the demonstration area where James and Max waited with Ethan. "We have a situation," Bobby said quietly. "There's a woman whose daughter has been having episodes that don't register on standard tests. Multiple neurologists, no diagnosis. She drove 4 hours after seeing a news piece about our program." He hesitated, clearly torn between the carefully planned demonstration and the urgent need before them. "She's desperate, James." James looked at Max, then at Ethan, who had remained in position on the couch, waiting for the demonstration to continue. The boy had been living with his condition for years. This woman's daughter might be at the beginning of a similar journey, but without the resources and support the Miller family could provide. "Ethan," James said, turning to the teenager, "would you mind if we pause our demonstration to help someone else?" The boy sat up, immediately grasping the situation. "Of course not. That's the whole point of this, right? To help people." With that simple permission, James signaled to Sarah, who had moved to the edge of the demonstration area during the disruption. "Bring them in," he instructed, "and ask Dr. Levine to join us if she's willing." Dr. Rachel Levine, a neurologist who had been consulting with the program, was seated in the second row and immediately stood at the mention of her name. The audience watched in rapt attention as the security team escorted a woman and a girl of about 9 to the demonstration area. The child appeared normal at first glance, perhaps a bit pale and certainly nervous at being the sudden center of attention. James knelt to bring himself to her eye level, his manner shifting automatically to the gentle reassurance he'd used with countless children during his police career. "Hello there," he said warmly. "This is my friend Max. Would it be okay if he says hello to you?" The girl nodded shyly, her eyes fixed on the German Shepherd, who had assumed a relaxed, non-threatening posture at James's signal. Max approached carefully, his demeanor gentle as he allowed the child to offer her hand for sniffing. It was a standard introduction protocol, nothing unusual until Max suddenly stiffened, his attention focusing intently on the girl in the same distinctive way it had with Ethan minutes earlier. James recognized the change immediately. "He's alerting," he said quietly to Dr. Levine, who had joined them in the demonstration area. Same pattern as with Ethan. The audience had fallen completely silent, the scheduled program forgotten as they witnessed the unscripted interaction unfolding before them. The mother knelt beside her daughter, one arm protectively around her shoulders. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Dr. Levine could formulate a careful, medically appropriate response, the situation escalated dramatically. The girl's expression went blank, her body stiffening, slightly subtle changes that might have been missed in many contexts, but were immediately apparent to the trained observers present. Within seconds, the episode progressed to a series of small muscle jerks, then to a full seizure that had the medical professionals in the audience rushing forward to assist. Dr. Levine took charge of the situation, directing the emergency response with calm efficiency. As the seizure subsided and the girl began to regain awareness, the doctor turned to the mother with newfound urgency. "Your daughter is having seizures that present atypically, which is why they've been difficult to diagnose. But they're very real. And Max detected it before any visible symptoms appeared. This is exactly the kind of case where our specialized detection can make a crucial difference in diagnosis and treatment." The unplanned demonstration had accomplished what months of carefully prepared presentations might not have achieved. In the audience, Captain Harrison and his colleagues from Blue Line exchanged significant glances, their professional skepticism visibly giving way to recognition of capabilities they had previously dismissed. Medical professionals were already clustering around Dr. Levine, discussing implications for diagnostic protocols. Service dog organizations' representatives were reassessing their evaluation criteria in light of what they had witnessed. As emergency medical personnel arrived to transport the girl to a hospital where Dr. Levine had arranged for immediate comprehensive testing, James found himself at the center of a swirl of activity. The demonstration day had transformed from a controlled presentation into a vivid, real-world validation of everything the program stood for. And Max, once rejected and nearly discarded, had become the living embodiment of potential, almost lost a powerful argument for the program's continued development. What no one in the pavilion realized, as they processed the dramatic events of the afternoon, was that the most significant test of the program's value still lay ahead, and that James Wilson, whose heart condition had stabilized but not disappeared, would soon face a crisis that would put everything they had built at risk. 3 weeks after the demonstration day, the Specialized Canine Recognition Program had entered a new phase of heightened credibility and accelerated development. The dramatic intervention with the undiagnosed child had generated significant media coverage, leading to a surge in referrals from medical professionals and inquiries from families across the country. Dr. Levine had formally joined the program's advisory board, bringing scientific rigor to the documentation of the dog's detection abilities. Most significantly, Blue Line Training Center had initiated discussions about a potential partnership, with Captain Harrison acknowledging that their traditional evaluation methods might benefit from incorporating elements of the specialized recognition protocols. For James Wilson, the program's sudden expansion brought both satisfaction and exhaustion. Daily operations now included coordinating with medical researchers, hosting visiting professionals for observation sessions, and managing the intake of new canine candidates transferred from traditional programs. The cottage on the Miller estate had become command central, with his modest living room often filled with research papers, training logs, and evaluation forms awaiting his review. Though he never complained, the strain of 18-hour days was beginning to show in the deepening lines around his eyes and the occasional shortness of breath he attempted to conceal from his colleagues. "You need to delegate more," Sarah insisted during her weekly visit, noticing how James paused to catch his breath after climbing the short set of steps to his front porch. "The program doesn't rest entirely on your shoulders." "It's just temporary growing pains," James replied with a dismissive wave. "Once we get the new trainers up to speed, things will calm down." He didn't mention that he'd started skipping doses of his heart medication when the side effects made him too drowsy to complete his work, nor that he'd postponed his scheduled cardiology appointment due to conflicting program obligations. What concerned Sarah more than James's obvious fatigue was Max's behavior. The German Shepherd had become increasingly attentive to his handler, seldom leaving James's side even during off-duty hours. Several times during her visit, Sarah noticed Max nudging James's hand or leg in a manner reminiscent of his seizure alerts with Ethan. When she mentioned this observation, James brushed it off as simple affection, but the worry in his eyes suggested he'd noticed the pattern himself. The following Saturday dawned clear and crisp, a perfect early autumn day for the community outreach event scheduled at Riverfront Park in Alexandria. The program had arranged a public demonstration and information session featuring several successful dog handler teams and educational materials about the various conditions the dogs could detect. James had initially planned to handle administrative duties from the background, allowing newer members of the team to take the spotlight, but a last-minute cancellation had required him to step in with Max for the main demonstration. By mid-morning, the park was filled with families, medical professionals, and service dog enthusiasts moving between information booths and demonstration areas. Max performed flawlessly through 2 scheduled presentations, showing the same focused attention and precise alerting behavior that had made him the program's flagship success. James, however, was struggling more than he cared to admit. The unusually warm September day, combined with the exertion of public speaking and demonstrating handling techniques, had left him periodically dizzy and uncomfortably aware of his heart's irregular rhythm. As the event was winding down, a mother approached the main information booth, where James was answering questions. She carried a sleeping toddler whose peaceful expression gave no hint of the medical challenges described on the intake form she handed to the staff member. The child had been experiencing unexplained episodes of sudden unconsciousness that had baffled neurologists and cardiologists alike. Traditional testing had revealed nothing conclusive, leaving the family in medical limbo. "We were hoping to have her observed by one of your detection dogs," the mother explained, the exhaustion of prolonged medical uncertainty evident in her voice. "We've been on the waiting list for an evaluation, but when we heard about today's event..." James checked the schedule, confirmed they had already concluded the day's formal activities, and noted the staff's preparations to dismantle the booths. Protocol dictated that initial screenings take place in controlled environments at the program facility, not at public events. But something in the mother's desperate hope reminded him of that first, unplanned intervention at the demonstration day, an opportunity that might not come again. "We can do a preliminary observation," he decided, silencing the staff member's beginning protest with a gentle shake of his head. "It's not a formal evaluation, but it might give us information to prioritize her case." The mother's relief was palpable as James led her to a quieter area beneath a large oak tree, away from the dispersing crowd. Max followed attentively, already shifting into his working demeanor. James instructed the mother to sit on a park bench with her child, explaining that Max would simply observe them for a few minutes while the child rested naturally. As Max settled into his observation position, James felt another wave of dizziness wash over him, stronger than before. He reached for the bench to steady himself, his vision momentarily graying at the edges. Max immediately broke his focus on the child, turning toward James with the distinctive alerting behavior they had documented dozens of times with Ethan and other patients. The German Shepherd whined softly, pawing at James's leg with increasing urgency. "He's alerting to you," the mother observed with concern, her own medical situation temporarily forgotten. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," James insisted, though the pressure in his chest suggested otherwise. "He's just distracted. We'll try again in a moment." He attempted to redirect Max's attention to the child, but the dog refused to comply, instead pressing his body against James's legs as if trying to support him. A program staff member who had been observing from a distance approached quickly, alarmed by the unusual behavior. "James, what's happening? Is Max okay?" "Something's wrong with Mr. Wilson," the mother said firmly, her own experience with medical crises sharpening her perception. "His color isn't right, and the dog is trying to tell us something." James tried once more to dismiss their concerns, but the words died in his throat as a crushing pain radiated through his chest and down his left arm. His knees buckled, and only Max's solid presence against his legs prevented him from collapsing completely. Through a narrowing tunnel of awareness, he heard the staff member shouting for medical assistance and felt Max's warm body pressing against him as he slid to the ground. The last thing James registered before consciousness faded was Max's intelligent eyes fixed on his face, filled with the same unwavering loyalty and determination that had earned the dog his second chance at purpose. As darkness closed in, James's final coherent thought was a mixture of irony and regret that Max had likely been alerting to his deteriorating condition for weeks, and that he, the program's champion of specialized recognition, had failed to recognize the warning directly in front of him. Within minutes, park rangers trained in emergency medicine arrived at the scene, followed shortly by paramedics responding to multiple urgent calls. As they worked to stabilize James's condition, Max maintained his position, refusing to be separated from his handler despite the chaotic activity surrounding them. The German Shepherd's behavior, calm but insistent on remaining in physical contact with James, was so unusual that the medical team eventually relented, allowing him to remain at the edge of their workspace as they prepared for emergency transport. Massive cardiac event, one paramedic reported into her radio as they loaded James onto a stretcher. Patient unresponsive, irregular heartbeat, BP dropping, requesting priority clearance to Virginia Heart Center. As the ambulance doors closed, Max's anxious bark echoed across the suddenly subdued park, a sound that seemed to capture the fear and uncertainty that had descended upon the program's future in the space of a few catastrophic minutes. The Virginia Heart Center's cardiac intensive care unit operated with the quiet efficiency common to specialized medical facilities, but nurses moved purposefully between monitoring stations. Physicians consulted in hushed tones outside patient rooms, and family members waited anxiously in designated areas, but their conversations subdued by concern. In the small consultation room adjacent to the ICU, an unusual gathering had formed in the hours following James Wilson's admission. Sarah Thompson, representing the sanctuary, Bobby Miller and his son Ethan, Dr. Rachel Levine, and Captain Michael Harrison from Blue Line, who had arrived immediately upon hearing the news. "The cardiac team is doing everything possible," Dr. Levine explained, having used her professional status to obtain information from the attending physician. Mr. Wilson suffered a significant myocardial infarction, a heart attack complicated by his pre-existing arrhythmia. They've stabilized him for now, but the next 24 hours will be critical. Bobby Miller paced the small room, uncharacteristically disheveled in the clothes he'd been wearing when the emergency call interrupted a film production meeting. "Where's Max now? Has anyone checked on him?" "The program's assistant director has him at the facility," Sarah replied. "He's physically fine but extremely agitated. They're having difficulty keeping him calm without James." She hesitated before adding, "There's something else we need to discuss." The staff member who was with James at the park reported that Max was alerting to him before he collapsed, the same distinctive alerting behavior he uses for seizure detection. Captain Harrison leaned forward, his professional interest momentarily overriding personal concern. "Are you suggesting the dog was detecting the impending cardiac event?" "It's more than that," Sarah continued. "According to several staff members, Max has been showing similar alerting behaviors toward James for weeks." James dismissed it as normal bonding behavior, but in retrospect, he knew, Ethan interjected, his adolescent voice cracking slightly with emotion. "Max knew something was wrong with James, just like he knows when I'm going to have a seizure. But nobody understood what he was trying to tell us." The realization fell heavily on the group. They had devoted months to developing protocols for interpreting canine alerts related to neurological events, but had never systematically documented potential indicators for cardiac conditions. An entire category of potentially life-saving detection had been operating right in front of them, unrecognized because their framework remained too narrow. As evening approached, a hospital administrator entered the consultation room with an apologetic expression. "I'm afraid I have to address a situation developing at the main entrance," she began carefully. "There's a group of people with a German Shepherd insisting the animal needs to be allowed into the ICU. They're causing quite a disturbance." Bobby Miller rose immediately. "That would be our program staff with Max. I'll handle this." His tone made it clear that the matter was not open for discussion. In the hospital lobby, a tense standoff had developed between security personnel and 3 program staff members restraining an increasingly distressed Max. The German Shepherd's normally disciplined demeanor had given way to anxious whining and determined pulling toward the elevator banks. Mr. Miller, the lead security officer, acknowledged with visible relief as Bobby approached. "Perhaps you can explain to your colleagues that hospital policy absolutely prohibits animals in the intensive care unit. We've suggested they take the dog home and—" "This isn't a pet," Bobby interrupted, his celebrity status momentarily forgotten in his intense focus on the situation. "This is a specially trained medical detection dog who has been alerting to Mr. Wilson's condition for weeks. Dr. Levine can verify the dog's credentials and capabilities." The administrator, who had followed Bobby from the consultation room, shook her head firmly. "Mr. Miller, regardless of the animal's training, ICU protocol is absolute. Infection control standards alone prohibit." "Get the hospital director," Bobby said quietly, a steel-like quality entering his voice, "and the head of the cardiology department. Tell them Bobby Miller needs to discuss an emergency exemption, and it can't wait until morning." Within 30 minutes, an unprecedented meeting convened in the hospital director's office. Dr. Levine presented preliminary data from the program's work with neurological patients, emphasizing the documented accuracy of Max's detection abilities. The program staff described the pattern of alerts Max had been displaying toward James in recent weeks. Bobby Miller leveraged his considerable influence, making it clear that his foundation's relationship with the hospital, including a recent 7-figure donation to the cardiac wing, reflected his confidence in their innovative type approaches to patient care. Throughout the discussion, Max remained in the hallway with Ethan, who had volunteered to stay with the dog while the adults negotiated. Through the partially open door, the German Shepherd maintained his focus on the conversation, his intelligent eyes following each speaker as if understanding the high stakes of their debate. Finally, the hospital director sighed deeply. "What you're requesting violates multiple protocols. However—" No, he continued, raising a hand to forestall the cardiac department head's objection. "We've built our reputation on pioneering approaches to patient care. Dr. Levine, if you're willing to take professional responsibility for monitoring this situation and if we implement additional precautions, we can authorize a limited visit, 15 minutes maximum, and only after the dog has undergone a thorough cleaning procedure." 1 hour later, after Max had been bathed with medical-grade antimicrobial solutions and fitted with specially designed booties and a clean working vest, a small procession moved quietly through the ICU toward James Wilson's room. The attending physician had been adamant that only 2 people accompany the dog, Dr. Levine for medical supervision and Sarah Thompson, who had the most experience handling Max besides James himself. The sight that greeted them was sobering. James lay unconscious, connected to multiple monitoring devices and an oxygen support system. His normally robust appearance had given way to a frightening pallor, his features somehow smaller against the stark white hospital linens. Sarah felt Max tense beneath her hand, his entire body quivering with recognition and concern. "Easy," she murmured, guiding him slowly toward the bed. "Easy, boy." Max approached with uncharacteristic hesitation, his nose working to process the unfamiliar medical smells overlaying the familiar scent of his handler. When he reached the bedside, he gently raised his head until he could see James's face, his ears pivoting forward in intense concentration. "His vital signs are responding," Dr. Levine noted quietly, watching the monitors. "Heart rate stabilizing, blood pressure improving slightly. It's subtle, but it's there." For nearly 10 minutes, Max maintained his position beside James, occasionally making soft sounds in his throat that were neither whines nor whimpers but seemed to contain elements of both. The medical staff who had gathered outside the room watched in professional curiosity, but their skepticism giving way to reluctant fascination as the monitoring equipment registered continued small improvements in the patient's condition. As their allotted time neared its end, Sarah prepared to lead Max away. But as she applied gentle pressure to his lead, the German shepherd planted his feet firmly, refusing to move. Instead, he pressed his muzzle against James's motionless hand, then looked up at Sarah with such profound intention that she found herself momentarily frozen. "He's trying to tell us something," she said to Dr. Levine, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't just attachment. He's detecting something specific." The doctor hesitated, torn between protocol and the compelling evidence before her. 5 more minutes, she decided, reaching for her phone. "And I want the cardiac fellow in here with an EKG." What happened next would later be described in a groundbreaking paper published in the Journal of Medical Detection Research. As additional monitoring equipment was brought in, Max's behavior shifted from general vigilance to specific alerting patterns, the same distinctive paw placement and posture he used when detecting an impending seizure in Ethan. Within minutes of this alert, the cardiac monitors registered a dangerous rhythm disturbance that might have gone undetected until it became critical. Immediate intervention, the cardiac specialist ordered, all skepticism forgotten in the urgency of the moment. The dog detected a pre-arrhythmic pattern before our equipment could register it. In the organized chaos that followed, Max was quickly but gently removed from the room, his mission accomplished. The medical team administered targeted treatment for the detected arrhythmia, potentially averting a second, more severe cardiac event. And as Sarah led the German shepherd back through the ICU corridors, staff members who had initially resisted his presence now regarded him with newfound respect. The following morning, as watery sunlight filtered through the blinds of the ICU room, James Wilson opened his eyes for the first time since his collapse. His awareness returned gradually, piecing together fragmented memories of the park, the pain, and the ambulance ride. A familiar figure sat beside his bed, not Sarah or Bobby Miller as he might have expected, but Captain Michael Harrison from Blue Align, reading a file with intense concentration. "Michael?" James's voice emerged as a hoarse whisper, barely audible above the mechanical hum of the monitoring equipment. Harrison looked up sharply, setting the file aside as he leaned forward. "Welcome back, Wilson. You gave everyone quite a scare." "Max?" James managed, his first coherent thought being concern for his partner. "Safe at the sanctuary with Sarah, and quite the hero, as it happens." Harrison's typically stern expression softened slightly. "There's something I need to discuss with you now that you're conscious. Something about Maxwell's training history at Blue Align." With careful deliberation, Harrison picked up the file he'd been reviewing. "After your incident, I had our records department pull Max's complete training file, not just the summary reports, but the daily observation notes from each trainer who worked with him. Something wasn't adding up about his disqualification." James listened with growing confusion as Harrison explained what the detailed review had revealed. Max's hesitation during threat assessment hadn't been an isolated incident. Throughout his training, multiple handlers had noted similar brief pauses, but particularly around one specific trainer, a relatively new staff member, who had been assigned to Max during his final evaluation phase. 3 months after Maxwell was removed from the program, that trainer suffered a major cardiac event during a training exercise. Harrison continued, the professional detachment in his voice unable to completely mask his discomfort. "In reviewing the surveillance footage from Max's final assessment, we now believe what we interpreted as hesitation was actually the same alerting behavior he displayed with you. He wasn't failing the threat assessment, he was detecting a cardiac anomaly in the trainer." The revelation settled over James like a physical weight. Max had been alerting all along, using the only communication method available to him, but his handlers had fundamentally misinterpreted his behavior. Instead of recognizing his extraordinary ability, they had labeled him deficient and discarded him. The injustice of it, not just to Max, but to all the people he might have helped during those lost months, was staggering. "Why are you telling me this now?" James asked, his medical condition momentarily forgotten in the face of this new information. Harrison met his gaze directly, professional pride giving way to genuine regret. "Because your program got it right when our so-called Center of Excellence got it wrong." And because that dog of yours saved your life twice now, once by alerting, even though none of us understood what he was trying to tell us, and again last night, when he detected a rhythm disturbance that even the cardiac monitors missed. He placed the file carefully on James's bedside table. We need to rewrite the protocols, Wilson, all of them, and we need your help to do it. 6 months after James Wilson's life-altering cardiac event, the International Conference on Medical Detection Animals convened in Washington, D.C., drawing participants from 27 countries. The grand ballroom of the National Convention Center had been transformed into a professional showcase featuring research posters, training demonstrations, and specialized equipment developed specifically for documenting canine detection capabilities. At the center of it all stood a comprehensive exhibit detailing the newly established Wilson-Miller Protocol for Integrated Canine Assessment, a revolutionary approach to identifying and developing specialized detection dogs. The morning's keynote address generated particular anticipation among attendees. When James Wilson walked onto the stage, accompanied by Max in his custom working vest with newly designed cardiac alert patches, the audience rose in spontaneous standing ovation. Though still leaner than before his heart attack and moving with the careful deliberation of someone who had faced mortality directly, James carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had found his true purpose. "Thank you for that warm welcome," he began, waiting for Max to settle into his preferred position slightly behind and to the right, a tactical placement that allowed the German Shepherd to monitor his handler while remaining unobtrusive. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have believed I'd be standing here today. The fact that I am is due to this extraordinary animal and the fundamental reassessment of canine capabilities he inspired. Over the next 40 minutes, James outlined the revolutionary policy changes that had transformed service dog selection and training across multiple disciplines. The Wilson-Miller Protocol, developed in collaboration with Blue Line Training Center, the Miller Foundation, and Canine Second Chances, had established a comprehensive framework for identifying specialized detection abilities in dogs previously rejected by traditional assessment methods. We discovered that approximately 18% of dogs disqualified from conventional programs weren't failing to detect, they were detecting something we hadn't asked them to identify, James explained as slides showing detection statistics appeared on the massive screen behind him. By reconceptualizing hesitation as potential processing time for complex sensory information, we've been able to harness previously overlooked capabilities with life-saving implications. The most significant policy innovation had occurred within medical institutions themselves. Following the dramatic demonstration of Max's cardiac detection abilities, Virginia Heart Center had established the nation's first hospital canine response team, a specialized unit of detection dogs, permitted limited access to clinical settings under strict protocols. Their initial 6-month pilot program had documented 14 successful early detections of cardiac events, 8 instances of undiagnosed seizure disorders, and 3 cases of rare biochemical conditions that had eluded traditional diagnostic procedures. Rather than viewing service animal regulations as inflexible barriers, we've worked collaboratively to develop evidence-based exceptions that balance infection control with potentially life-saving detection capabilities. James noted, acknowledging the hospital administrators in the audience who had championed the initiative despite initial resistance. The conference represented just one component of the comprehensive Miller Foundation initiative now dedicated to advancing specialized canine detection research and implementation. Bobby Miller had leveraged his considerable influence and resources to establish dedicated training facilities in partnership with major medical centers nationwide, but more significantly, his advocacy had secured substantial federal research funding for studying the physiological mechanisms underlying canine detection abilities across a spectrum of medical conditions. Previous research focused almost exclusively on what dogs could detect under controlled conditions, James explained. Our current work examines how they detect these conditions, with the goal of developing more effective training methods and potentially new medical diagnostic technologies inspired by canine sensory capabilities. As the formal presentation concluded and James invited questions from the audience, Sarah Thompson watched from the side of the stage with deep satisfaction. The Sanctuary's specialized program had expanded beyond her most ambitious projections, with rescued dogs from shelters nationwide now undergoing specialized assessment to identify potential detection abilities. More importantly, their success had fundamentally shifted the conversation within the service dog community from rigid pass-fail metrics toward a more nuanced understanding of different types of working capabilities. When James completed his presentation and exited the stage to renewed applause, he found himself surrounded by medical researchers, training specialists, and hospital administrators eager to discuss implementation details. Max maintained his attentive position beside his handler, occasionally alerting James with a subtle nudge when his heart rate elevated from the exertion of extended conversation. Each time this occurred, James would acknowledge the alert, take a measured breath, and continue his discussion with slightly reduced intensity, a living demonstration of the partnership they had developed. Later that afternoon, in the quiet courtyard behind the convention center, a more personal celebration unfolded. Ethan Miller, now 15 and more confident in managing his seizure condition with Max's weekly assistance, presented James with a handcrafted walking stick carved with the images of working dogs throughout history. Bobby Miller raised a toast to second chances for dogs, for handlers, and for outdated systems in need of revision. Captain Harrison, now director of Blue Line's Specialized Detection Division, acknowledged with uncharacteristic humility how much they had yet to learn from the animals they presumed to train. At the center of the gathering, Max moved easily among the people who had shaped his journey from rejected military candidate to pioneering medical detection dog. When he eventually settled at James's feet, resting his head lightly against the man's leg in a gesture of both vigilance and affection, the symbolism was lost on no one present. Sometimes I think about how many links in the chain had to connect for us to reach this point, James reflected, absently stroking Max's head. If he hadn't failed that assessment, if I hadn't visited the shelter that day, if Sarah hadn't created the auction program, if Bobby hadn't intervened, so many moments where everything could have gone differently. Or perhaps, Sarah suggested gently, it was simply that Max found exactly where he was meant to be, with exactly the person who could understand what he was trying to tell us all along. As evening approached and the gathering began to disperse, James and Max made their way toward the car where their driver waited to return them to the modest but comfortable home they now shared near the training facility. Though medical protocols and public appearances remained important aspects of their work, both handler and dog seemed most content in the quiet moments between obligations. Max alert but relaxed at James's side, James secure in the knowledge that his canine partner would detect any concerning changes long before conventional symptoms appeared. "You know, Max," James said quietly as they walked through the spring evening, the cherry blossoms beginning to emerge along the capital's famous tidal basin. "They call us pioneers and innovators, but we're really just two old dogs who figured out how to listen to each other." Max glanced up at his handler with the focused intelligence that had once been misinterpreted as hesitation, and James smiled at the perfect understanding that had transformed both their lives. "Come on, partner, let's go home." In life's autumn years, when the path narrows and society often looks past our wisdom, after puppy rejection reminds us that our greatest contributions may still lie ahead. Like James Wilson, many of us carry decades of experience that the world has seemingly forgotten. We understand what it means to be overlooked, to have our knowledge, our instincts, our worth questioned simply because of our age. But this story affirms what we've always known, that genuine wisdom comes from recognizing value where others see flaws, and that sometimes the most profound connections emerge when we open ourselves to unexpected second chances. James didn't just save Max, they saved each other, transforming rejection into purpose and loneliness into legacy. Remember that your lifetime of experience allows you to see potential where younger eyes might miss it. Your willingness to trust your instincts, even when they contradict conventional wisdom, isn't outdated thinking. It's the kind of perspective our hurried world desperately needs. Like James, your most meaningful chapter may be the one you haven't written yet. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.